Thank you. It's lovely to be with you all this afternoon. As was mentioned, I work for Hope for the Future, which works to train, support and equip groups and individuals to build effective relationships with MPs around climate change. And in this 10 minutes, I'm going to speak to two things. Firstly, I'll make the case for taking the trouble to engage with MPs on the basis that change happens at the speed of trust. And secondly, I'll talk about a few of the principles of engagement that we use at Hope for the Future. But if you take anything at all away from what I say, let it be that there's an organisation out there which exists specifically to help you through the process of engaging effectively with your MP in your context, and we'd love for you to get in touch. I and my colleagues will be happy to arrange a phone conversation to work out the ways that we can support you, and I'll make sure that my email address goes in the chat. So firstly, you should engage with your MPs on the basis that change happens at the speed of trust. And I'd like you to think about the journey that you've taken to being here today, because I'd like to reckon that actually the vast majority of us are here because of our relationships with other people, whether that's friends or family or others who we respect, leading us to prioritising climate action. I know that's true for me, and I know that's true for others on this call. And actually, I think most change does happen at the prompting of someone or something that we trust. Now, unfortunately, within the wider context of our political system, it's characterised by high levels of mistrust and disillusionment in many cases also. And there are changes that need to happen to improve that on the systemic level. But actually, I'm not going to talk so much about that so much as the individual context, because Hope for the Future works at the constituency level in the context that exists at present. And we try and help constituents build trust with MPs so that they take climate action. And we come across lots of constituents who feel powerless to affect change. But I think it's also really worth noting that that's the same for a lot of MPs as well. They often express things like, oh, it doesn't feel like my decision. It feels like the decision of whoever it is within my party that's making policy, or it feels like it lies with a government cabinet that they're not part of, etc. So our work at Hope for the Future is to overcome the barriers that exist on a very individual basis on the side of both the constituent and also the MP. And often our work means translating what is an incredibly multifaceted systemic need to action into very specific contexts and building trust over the longer term. And actually, we think this is worthwhile precisely because change happens at the speed of trust. And large businesses in key sectors will employ teams to manage relationships with stakeholders, including MPs, especially if a business is located within a particular constituency. I know from having worked in an MP's office, which had an airport within the constituency, how much effort was put into arranging regular meetings, sending through briefings at moments of legislative importance, and to make invitations for the MP to visit. And there's a reason that organisations do this and don't just send loads of general emails about, for example, the general benefits of aviation, but it's because they know it's more effective to build a good in-person relationship. So really Hope for the Future is trying to act as a resourcing pool for constituents, groups, individuals to build the same kind of quality of relationships so that MPs aren't only hearing from well-resourced briefings from high carbon industry sectors, but they know the concerns and ways of supporting their local constituency with the transition to zero carbon emissions, which needs to be made in the coming decades. So that's the first thing to say really, is that change happens at the speed of trust. And that's why it's really worthwhile engaging on that very individual basis. So how do we do this? And here are a few very quick principles for working collaboratively with politicians on an individual level. And they go like this: arrange a meeting, find common ground, and create multiple opportunities for engagement. And you may be like, oh, this is really straightforward, I can do that. In which case, great, please go and do it. But if that sounds daunting, please just get in touch with Hope for the Future and we'll help. So the first thing, arrange a meeting. We always advise this over letters and emails because they allow for dialogue. Whatever you do, you're effectively inviting a response in kind. So if you send a 10-second email, actually it's very proportionate to get a 10-second response from the MP's office. But actually, if you've taken a few hours to thoughtfully form a personal letter to your MP alongside a group of others, if you've attached it nicely to an email, then actually what you're going to do is make the member of staff sat in that MP's office feel like, oh, they need to flag it to the MP for an individual response and schedule time for a meeting. And then once you're in a meeting itself, that's a really good venue for building an actual relationship, because it's a dialogue that can happen there and then. It's operating as a conversation. It's not kind of binary back and forth or a dispute about a particular fact. Meetings mean that you can find out much more obviously where your MP is at. And we really encourage people to ask curious questions that you just wouldn't be able to get an email response to. Things like what an MP's individual priorities are within certain timeframes, or whether they prioritise one factor or over another, etc. And also, if you're making an ask of an MP, then you're asking it in person in a way that you can get an immediate response, and in a way that you can kind of tailor it to how your conversation has gone, and also get a commitment that you can then follow up with. It's much more meaningful. So that's the first thing. That's why we encourage meetings. Second of all is find common ground. What we would like is for you to be the constituent that your MP dreams of meeting. So you've got to think about what your MP is interested in. And a bit like Rebecca was talking about how this impacts on loads of other areas of society. MPs will be interested in things like jobs and healthcare or whatever. So if they have a specific interest, use that and connect it to what you want to talk about, because that way what you're saying will resonate so much more easily. And over time, when you have a relationship that's more established and there is that trust there, that's where you can start to challenge a little bit more and broaden out what you're talking about. But for like an initial conversation, what you're doing is focusing on building trust. And actually, just by virtue of the fact that you're meeting an MP, you're going to be within a particular category of someone who's very passionate about an issue. But sometimes we can end up a little bit like marathon runners, talking to a non-runner just about how great marathons are. And actually, if we want someone who doesn't run to run, then the best way is probably not to talk about marathons and how much you love marathons, but to tell them about Couch to 5K and what it is and how they can do it and how they can access it. And it's a bit like that with MPs who might have they have a broad understanding, but actually they don't really know how climate change relates to their constituency, or they don't really know how it relates to their very specific interest in one area of healthcare. And so if you can make that connection for them in a way that they trust you, then you're going to get a lot further with them. And then you can celebrate with them taking that first step or their equivalent of Couch to 5K. And then once they've done that, take them on to the next thing. And that leads me to the last thing about creating multiple opportunities for engagement. So within Hope for the Future, we have lots of different streams of projects. So mine is the faith project and work, but there's also schools and media and councils. And actually what we find is really effective is for an MP to access the issue of climate change from lots of different perspectives across their constituency. So they go to a schools workshop, and then they're invited to a panel event hosted by a local church, and then they get asked to write something in the local media, and suddenly they're seeing a very broad support across all the different areas within their constituency, and they start to build a bit of a framework for climate issues and how they can take action on it, and then they'll start to prioritise it within their parliamentary work. So I know I've gone through that really quickly. The main things are change happens at the speed of trust. So it's really worth building trust with an MP and politician of whatever nature, and that you should arrange a meeting, find common ground, and create multiple opportunities for engagement. And the more creative you can make that, the better. And I'll be happy to answer questions and also answer emails after this event is over as well. Thank you.